Hey, Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all honor, praise, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone, for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquath and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai, back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I just wanted to go through a little bit of spiritual extraction between an account between our forefathers, King Saul and King David, right? And kind of just examining some of King David's behavior and understanding that sometimes you can apply a lot of these situations to ourselves and our walk, and how to actually perform and not essentially suffer in an evil way, but rather suffer in a righteous way, right? So a lot of us, as a people, especially our people as a whole, they don't understand how to suffer in a good way rather than suffering in an evil way. And that's one of the biggest things that's our people don't understand is the nature of the Lord, that he's a balanced power, and understanding that there's a way to suffer. And predominantly, what most of the times what you will find is that our people do suffer essentially in a negative way, right? So I'm just going to go through a bit of go through a bit of this story here, and just do some spiritual extraction, and sincerely hoping that this lesson will be edifying, right? So before I actually read the story, just to kind of set the tone, I want to just get this precept. Since I mentioned suffering in a negative way, let me get this precept here. This is First Peter chapter 4, verse 15, and it says, "Let none of you suffer as a murderer, or as a thief, or as an evildoer, or as a busybody in other men's matters. Yet if any man suffer as," well, here it says Christian, right? But we know the Christians were first called, the Israelites were first called Christians in Antioch, right? Just for edification. "Let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify the Most High Yahweh on his behalf," right? So, we don't suffer in the sense of, going into the store and going in and stealing some bread, but we suffer in essentially a righteous way, where sometimes we go through situations that they seem unfair, right? But sometimes there's always little peaceable nuggets and fruits to actually acquire in those midst of those situations, right? So I kind of wanted to go through an account here of how King David conducted himself in the midst of that, in the midst of his life, in the midst of this walk, in the midst of this situation, because a lot of these things we can apply to ourselves, So let me go back to the story, and again, as I said, I hope this lesson truly is edifying to you, right? So this is 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 1, and it says, "And it came to pass, when Saul was returned from following the Philistines, that it was told him, saying, Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi. Then Saul took 3,000 men out of all Israel, and went to seek David upon his men upon the rocks of the wild goats," right? So that's a lot of people. That's like, you're taking a lot of people just to find one person, right? So keep in mind that King Saul and King David, brothers that may not have known the story or know the story, these are two people of the same kin, right? They're both Israelites, right? Just different tribes, that's all, right? This is verse 3, and it says, "And it came to the sheepcotes by the way, where was a cave, and Saul went in to cover his feet, and David and his men remained in the sides of the cave. And the men of David said unto him, Behold, the day of which the Lord Yahweh said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand, that thou mayest do to him as it shall seem good unto thee. Then David arose and cut off the skirt of Saul's robe privately. So, there was a piece of Saul's robe that he was wearing, and David, sliced off a piece, right? Kind of like how you might go to like a fabric store and they might cut off a piece there and here, right? So this is what happened, right? So as soon as he did this, it says here, this is verse 5. And it came to pass afterward that David's heart smote him, because he had cut off Saul's skirt. And he said unto his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing that he is the anointed of the Lord, right? So keep in mind also, in this relationship, in this dynamic here, is that Saul is the father-in-law of King David, right? So essentially what happens throughout David's story, when you go through the earlier chapters, King David, he slays Goliath, and he ends up marrying Saul's daughter Michal, right? So in this situation here now, just to keep in mind the closeness, and just keep in mind also the type of the circumstance of what's actually occurring here, and also other factors as well, because there were moments in David's situation, or I should say in David's walk, in David's life, where King Saul behaved very carnally towards King David. This is one of the things that King, as a matter of fact, let me get that as an example, then I'll come back to the story. Okay, this is 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 8, and it says, and Saul was very wroth, and saying displeased him, because there were the women that they were singing about, Saul has slain thousands and David is tens of thousands. So Saul became very, very carnal. So this is one of the things he did, right? And Saul was very wroth, and saying displeased him, and he said, they have ascribed unto David tens of thousands, and unto me have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day on forward, right? So he essentially started to have an evil eye towards his own son-in-law, right? Towards David. And it says, and it came to pass on the morrow that an evil spirit from the Most High came upon Saul as he prophesied in the midst of the house. David played with his hand as at other times, and there was a javelin in Saul's hand, and Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence twice, and Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord Yahweh was with him, and departed from Saul, right? So this is what he was doing, right? So and then David had the eyesight to be able to understand and sense that something was very off about him, and he avoided his Saul's attacks, right? So I'm reading this to show you the what's going actually on here. Now, as a culture, our people have forgotten how to actually conduct themselves with one another, and they don't understand the spiritual aspect of some of the things that they go through, right? So now, because they're so engulfed with this false understanding where God is all love all the time, and if he was all love all the time, then explain why there's an evil spirit from the Most High coming upon Saul to try and smite David here. So David here, what is he doing? He's exercising not just long suffering, but he's exercising the ability to remain spiritual and not recompensing evil for evil. Because when you think of black culture, when you think of so-called Hispanic culture, rap culture, really and truly what it is, it's a death culture. It's a death lifestyle where we have forgotten how to be nobles. We've forgotten how to be and conduct themselves as a certain um, pinnacle of man, of how we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be upright. Scriptures say that Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. As a matter of fact, one second. Just bear with me. Let me see if I can find that. Okay, so I went into the word. Just bear with me one second. I went into the word plain in the Hebrew here. Here it says thumb, H8552. It says complete. It says usually morally pious. It says coupled together, perfect, plain, undefiled, upright. It says one who lacks nothing in physical strength and beauty, sound, wholesome, complete, morally innocent, having integrity. One who is morally and ethically pure, right? So this is the way that Jacob, you tribes, us as Israelites, because Jacob's name was changed to Israel. This is the way that we were supposed to be as a people. But through culture, through this death culture, through being around the heathens and taking on their works, the scriptures also say that the righteous is more excellency than his neighbor, but the ways of wicked seduceth them. So being around these heathens has essentially dimmed our vibration to the point where we take on their customs, and that uprightness is no longer a way that we conduct ourselves. We conduct ourselves as heathens, not just the worshiping of God's portion, but the way that they treat each other, right? And we have lost the sentiment of how to actually be amongst another. Because here it is, if you tell this same story to a nigga on the street, I have to put it like that, excuse my French, if you say the same story to this type of individual without spiritual understanding, what would they have done? They would have taken the opportunity to basically smite King Saul. If they were David in this situation, they would have taken that opportunity to enact and get his own vengeance, right? But he understood that was the Lord's anointed. I'm not going to touch him, right? I'm going to long suffer, and I'm going to let the Lord fight on my behalf, right? So King David was remaining very, very spiritual in this particular circumstance. And I'm also saying this too because sometimes, even speaking from experience, where we may have handled a situation that wasn't the most upright in that scenario, whether it might be dealing with a woman, or dealing with unbelievers, or you live with unbelievers, or you live with parents or siblings or whoever. We didn't have the full understanding of how to actually conduct ourselves, right? And actually be able to offer up essentially a proper sacrifice, right? As opposed to how we should conduct ourselves around non-believers, right? So this is a particular situation as well, for brothers or sisters who if you might live with family who are not necessarily believers, but they're pleased to dwell with you. But you realize, even in the sense that they might have some type of animosity towards you, they may have done something to you. So in this situation, they may have done something towards you, or it could even be a brother also. They may have done something towards you where they did something that was not right, but you don't take it as an opportunity to get your own vengeance. That's not what we're speaking of here. That's what, King David remained and understood to continue to be spiritual, right? Hopefully this is all piecing together and actually adding up, right? So what I want to do, I want to go to Romans. Romans, just bear with me, hold on, let me just find this. This is Romans chapter 12, verse 17 here, and it says, recompense to no man evil for evil, provide things honest in the sight of all men, and if be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing, thou shalt reap coals of hot fire on his head, right? So it's just a way of conducting ourselves, especially in these times. Also, because in these times, especially, as the economy, strongly suffers, people have their mindsets are always in this world. That's something to also keep in mind and practice, because these people are very on edge. That's another thing also, because of the love of many waxing cold. Their investments are not their investments are not as booming as they thought it would be. They think that they have a lot of stake in this world, so to speak, right? But even more so, because of those situations, you don't give a place to wrath, right? We be angry, as Paul said, and essentially sin not, right? So it's just a mindset of performing proper conduct. And as a culture, like I said before, we have forgotten how to actually be amongst one another in righteousness and dwell with one another, right? The first thing to do, if you tell two niggas this type of situation, this type of story, the first thing they would do is think of is pulling up a knife, taking a gun, taking a weapon, and inflicting vengeance upon this person, right? We're not niggas. We're not niggas. We're not hoes. We're not bitches or anything like that. We're Israelites from our respective tribes, and this is something our people, have lost, because they essentially have become degenerates of a strange vine, as opposed to being that noble plant the Lord, intended us to actually be, right? So let me go here. Let me go back and read a little bit more here. So essentially here, you see that his heart, his mind, it smote him, so it stopped him. He was he was conscience stricken. He felt extremely bad that he was taking his vengeance upon King Saul, but King David never did it, right? And you might be in a situation like that, whether it might be you as a son towards a father, or towards a mother, or towards, you and your siblings. They may have done something to you. Remember Joseph's story. I'm sure Joseph felt something being reunited with his brothers, knowing what they did to him, right? If your parents may have done something to you, maybe they ridiculed you, maybe they didn't even throw, I'm using javelins in quotations, but maybe they didn't, actually try and, hurt you physically. Maybe they used some disgusting words towards you. They called you a Freemason, or they called you a this, they called you a that, they called you every foul name out of the book. Maybe they called you Judas, right? Whatever it was, you don't take it as an opportunity to get your own vengeance, right? That's mainly the point here of this lesson, right? And I'm kind of more speaking also amongst dealing with our own kid, right? To hell with the heathens, man. So, where was I? So, this is 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 8. And it says here, and David also arose afterwards and went out of the cave and cried after Saul, saying, My Lord is king. And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped on his face to the earth and bowed himself, right? So he still showed a certain sentiment of respect for King Saul, despite how King Saul was behaving. And it says, and David said to Saul, Whereof hearest thou men's words, saying, Behold, David seeketh thy hurt. Behold, this day thine eyes have seen how the Lord delivered thee today into mine hand in a cave. Some bade to kill thee, But my eyes spared thee. I said, I will not put forth my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, see the skirt of the robe in my hand, for in that I cut off the skirt of thy robe and killed thee not. Know thou and see that there is neither evil nor transgression in my hand, and I have not sinned against thee. Yet thou hurtest my soul to take it. The Lord Yahweh judge between me and thee, and avenge me of thee, but mine hand shall not be upon thee. So he was remaining, I'm not going to put my physical hands upon you. And he still had a certain level of respect and honor towards King David. And this is one of the things that as a culture that we're missing, especially amongst those that are older than us, right? And I'm talking about like when I say that, I mean like more like parents, elders, uncles, and so on and so forth, right? And a lot of them, when you deal with a lot of them can be, tripping, to so to speak, for lack of better words, right? So let me go here. This is First Peter chapter 3 verse 10. And it says, For he that will love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil, and his lips that they speak no guile. Let him eschew evil and do good, and let him seek peace and ensue it. For the eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, and ears are open unto their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against them that do evil, right? So you see the dynamic here, right? The eyes of the Lord, are over the righteous, right? And we need essentially an advocate to fight for us, right? So that's what we pray for, right? So, that's pretty much, I kind of just wanted to discuss in terms of vengeance. And you might have had an opportunity that came up to essentially, as a world they like to say, get your lick back, because when you think about gang culture, when you think about black culture, that's really what it really boils down to. It's just each afflicted side is always trying to get their lick back, right? And Jake doesn't seem to understand the importance of proper culture and how we're supposed to be as a noble. A lot of our people might know that they're kings, but they don't behave themselves as kings, right? So anyways, I thought I would just, discuss that real quick, for brothers, because you can always equate a lot of these stories for your own learning, as the scriptures do say, right? And, apply these different things, whether you might be in a situation dealing with, other Israelites that are not necessarily believers, but they might be pleased to dwell with you, or they behave very carnally, right? You don't take it as an opportunity to get your own vengeance. I guess I'll end off with this last one here. This is Titus chapter 1 verse 9, and it says, holding fast the faithful word that he hath been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine to both exhort and convince the gainsayers. So they may have been some people that they behaved a certain way towards you, but you don't take it as an opportunity to get your own vengeance, right? But that's pretty much the point. I sincerely hope and pray that this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim El Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.